All right. All right. So, thank you for inviting me to speak at your reading group today. I'm super excited to talk about my work here, and hopefully, we can have a nice scientific exchange afterwards. So, just to introduce myself briefly, I'm a second year PhD student at the group Scalable Trustworthy AI, and we are led by Songjoon Oh. And to summarize my current research interest in one line, I'm mostly working on understanding structure. Earlier, it was in parameter spaces, and for my ongoing work, it's now in visual embedding spaces. So, yeah, that was my primary interest, and my long-term goal is to contribute towards AI for optimal health. So, not just for healthcare, but for more like for the best case scenario. So like just perfect physical and mental health. But for today, we are just gonna talk about this ICLR paper that we wrote last year and we presented at ICLR this year. So the paper is titled "Do Deep Neural Network Solutions Form a Star Domain?" And I worked on it with my co-authors, Alex, Ehsan, who used to be at the University of Adelaide and now he's at Monash University, and my advisor, Song Suno. And right, so before we even go into the paper, we just talk about a bit of background just to set the context. So we know that deep neural network loss landscapes are non-convex, and this leads to the possibility of getting multiple solutions for the same learning problem. And basically, because of the stochasticity of gradient-based learning, um, just with different initializations and different batching orders or with augmentations, we end up at different points in the parameter space, and all of these points minimize for the objective equally good. So that's why that's where the question arises: how are the different minimizers connected, or how are they related to each other? So one concept that is used pretty frequently in the literature is loss barriers. So loss barriers basically tell us if we move from one point to the other in parameter space, what's the maximum loss that we incur along that line. The line, it doesn't have to be a line, but usually that's what we refer to when we say a loss barrier. So then, coming back to our question, how are different minima related? And of course, prior work, there is some prior work here. So one of those is this remarkable work from Entezari et al., and then follow-up work from Ainsworth et al. And these papers tell us that even though deep neural network solutions are not really convex, so to say, but in some other modulo permutation space, they do end up becoming convex. So basically, you have one solution here and the other solution here that lies in some other point, some other basin in the parameter space. And then what you do is you find an optimal permutation of the weights such that your function is preserved, but you end up in a different basin, which is which is the same basin as your first point in the parameter space. And but of course, that's not the entire story. The same paper also tells us that we have this sort of effect with increasing over parameterization. We get a decreasing trend in the loss barrier, or in other words, the solution set becomes more and more convex as we increase the parameterization or the degree of parameterization. So Then our question here is very simple. It's we're asking what's happening in narrower networks. So why does the convexity conjecture only hold for wide networks? And maybe to go even deeper, our question is there some kind of disparity in connectivity? So are some models here more connected than the other models? So um, so in that context, let's define something. Let's say that we will call a point in the parameter space a star model at tolerance epsilon. I'll get to this one later, but um, so basically, you fix one point in the parameter space, and then you try to see, okay, what's the maximum barrier between this point and all other points in the parameter space. And if that barrier happens to be less than epsilon, then you say this model is a star model at tolerance of epsilon. So can we find such models in the solution set? So let me walk you through this toy experiment to answer that. So this is not part of our main research, but I really like this. I really like this experiment, and I think it's one sec. Hmm. And I think it's a nice starting point. So yeah, let's go through this plot very briefly. So on the x-axis, you've got the width or the number of neurons in the hidden layer of a two-layer linear network. And on the y-axis, you've got the tolerance that ranges from 10 raised to minus 1 and goes all the way down to 10 raised to minus 6. And then the question is, as you increase the width or the degree of overparameterization, how many star models can you find in the solution set, or can you find any star model at all? So we start with, let's say, the lowest tolerance here, which is 10 raised to minus 6 at the top of the of this heat map. And we see that in the beginning at width of 2, we really have no such models. But as we increase the width to 4, we start seeing some of those models that we defined in the earlier slide. So then we've got 3 out of 100 models that are connected to all sorts of all other models in terms of this definition based on tolerance of epsilon. And then as we increase the width further, we see that almost all of the models become star models, or they satisfy our definition of star models. And then if we decrease the tolerance, we see that even more and more models naturally satisfy our criterion for star modelness, if you will. So this was for a two-layer linear network, and this gives us like preliminary evidence that we really have some sort of structure in the solution set, even if it's not entirely convex. But then, of course, it would be more interesting to move on to real world data sets, and that's what we do in our main paper. So, right. So, for our main paper, um, we don't do this kind of sampling anymore because the solution set is much bigger in that case, and it's easier to find these star models if we explicitly optimize for them. So I'll go over the Starlight algorithm that we introduce in order to do that. So we sample basically lots of solutions from the solution set. And how do we do that? Well, just change the random seed used to train these models and keep everything else identical. So we've got many different neural networks here, and then we separate the obtained solution set into two halves, not halves, but two unequal parts. So one is a bigger set of models that we call source models, and the other is a smaller set of models that we call held out models. And We will look at why we do that very briefly. So, first, we introduce this objective of basically enforcing connectivity between the star model or the candidate star model here and all of the other source models that we defined in our previous slide. And a check mark basically means the connection here is good. It's a linear connection. So how do we do this? So we use Monte Carlo optimization. So at every step of the optimization, we pick one of the lines segments here, and then we pick one of the points in that selected line segment and then optimize for the loss at that point. But remember that these green points, basically the source models are fixed. We just optimize this single model here. Okay, so then what do we achieve with that model? So remember that our claim or the hypothesis that we wanted to check was whether we can find star models in this bigger parameter space. And before, um, in order to verify that hypothesis, we agree on some kind of condition. So in this case, the condition is um, so if you remember, we also had this set of held out models in blue, and these models were not used in the training of this model during the Starlight algorithm. So we agree that if we find that the star model obtained here is also connected to these other models, then we will call it evidence towards star domainness of our obtained model. And that's what we do. And let's look at the results. Right. So this plot has a lot of things going on. So I'll go through them one by one. On the x-axis, we've got the number of models that were used during the training of the supposed star model. And on the y-axis, we've got the height of barrier. We've got two kinds of curves here, of course. Um, the orange curve is what's the average barrier between the star model obtained here and one of the held out models. And then for reference, we also report the statistical average over all regular models. So just to verify like what's the difference here or what's the disparity in connectivity between star and any other regular model. And by the way, this left plot is for cipher 10 over is for recent 18 trained over cipher 10, and the right plot is for cipher 100. And it's the trend is very clear here. As we increase the number of star models, our barrier with other held out models decreases significantly. So here it goes from 0.4 to almost zero. I think it was 0.07. And here as well, we see the same trend. And just the same result, but different presentation. So here we show, let's look at the second column. When we interpolate between the star model and one of the held out models, which is the orange curve, we see that the barrier height is way lower than when we interpolate between two kinds of regular models. And we found this super interesting. And just for completeness, we also show the accuracy curves corresponding to these loss curves, and we see the similar trend just flipped upside down, of course, because now we look at accuracy. So, and we also tried out our experiments for ImageNet scale models. For ImageNet, it was really challenging to train so many models from scratch, but our trend, like the main trend that we observed in our paper, remains consistent. So I'll just focus on the left set of plots here. So the training loss between the star model and one of the held out models. When we look at the barrier, it is lower than when we interpolate between two regular models. So, and just as an ablation, although it's not the main focus of the paper, we also look at how well the star model is connected to models that are trained using a different optimizer, in this case, Adam. So let's focus on the last two plots, or the rightmost two plots. So we've got interpolation between two Adam solutions, which is higher than when you interpolate between an Adam solution and our star model obtained in the previous experiments. And we found that we thought that it was pretty remarkable that you can train basically a star model using just SGD solutions, and then you end up more connected to Adam solutions than Adam solutions would be connected amongst each other. And then, although our main focus was just on understanding the structure of the solution space, we also look at other nice properties of the star domain conjecture, one of which is potential application to Bayesian model averaging. So, in this kind of application, it's very important to find a suitable modeling of the posterior in the parameter space. And in order to verify whether the posterior defined by the star domain is actually better than other posteriors like that of an ensemble, we conducted this experiment where we look at the probability-based calibration of the star models, the star domains probability prediction probabilities. And what we find is this nice trend where if we increase the number of ensemble members versus we increase the number of samples taken from the star domain, we find better calibration of the star domain. And um, and there was one more application that we potentially think it's really useful, which is about potentially replacing ensembles. So, for example, to look at the last row here, for cipher 100, a regular model achieves 77.3% test accuracy, whereas the star model at the same compute, well, at inference time, it takes the same compute and it ends up at a better test accuracy on average. And we thought it was pretty remarkable. And with more research into this kind of um, training algorithm, maybe we end up with even better models and preserve test complexity. All right, so I'll just come to the main takeaways here. Um, so we started off with Entezari's conjecture, which was about wide networks, and that when you have a wide overparameterized network, you have a nice structure in the parameter space, modulo permutations. And then we found that even for narrow networks, there is some sort of solution, some sort of structure in the solution set. And as you increase the overparameterization degree in the solutions, in the architecture, you slowly transition from star domainness to convexity. And and we thought that that was a very nice takeaway. And that also brings me to the end of my presentation, actually. So thank you so much for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.